When I found SciJourn, when I started doing the science literacy and the science journalism, I actually was at a point in my career that I wasn't sure I wanted to keep going. I was frustrated with the system. I was frustrated with how I was having to teach to hit the content, and I wasn't seeing a whole lot getting better anytime soon. I was invited in to do the SciJourn grant, and I was invited into the class, and it gave me a new way to approach a lot of my subject. This new way, also through read alouds and think alouds, and just having the kids talk about their topics, which tend to be very personal to them, allowed me to become closer to my students. When I opened up myself to talk about topics in a read aloud or a think aloud, I spent time talking about myself, even though I was talking about the topic, because they got my personal opinion on it, and they learned more about me. So I became closer to my students just through this topic, and just through this way of looking at things. As far as my teaching style, it's changed dramatically since I started this. I've definitely looked at everything has to have a real-world implication to it, or why are we really teaching it? If it doesn't have a connection to them in a real-world sense, we're not really doing anything but having them memorize facts and figures for later in life that they're not going to use.
A really neat story about one of my former students who was in ABC, which is, the middle level science class, but she went off to college, and her English professor in college stopped her and wanted to know why she could write so well. And she told her, well, my science teacher had me do SciJourn when I was in high school, and that's how I learned to write.
The whole thing about SciJourn is it's fundamentally kind of changed how I teach. Now, just for example, in biology, we're doing the cell and the cell parts, and we're looking at mitochondria, and the kids don't have any idea, what's a mitochondria, what's it for, and you find a news article, you pull out something that's been written about mitochondrial disease, and then all of a sudden it's front and center to a kid. Hey, this is a kid my age who's got a mitochondrial disease, and the news story kind of talks about the money, but also what's the kid's life like. And so then they're kind of buying into this idea of, okay, the mitochondria is important. Any topic, we're getting ready to come up on solid and hazardous waste, and we've got some real big issues in St. Louis right now with solid and hazardous waste, with our nuclear history. And so the kids really get into, we have the cancer cluster right here. I mean, we are at the center at my school of a huge cancer cluster, and the state's tried to cover it up. And so they published something that, and then it got really ripped on in the newspapers, and scientists really had issues, with what they're talking about. And so it's great for the kids to read those news articles and then realize, okay, yeah, what we're learning in class has some effect in the real world. And so to me, that is where news has fundamentally changed, more in the reading process, but then in the writing as well, because I do think by the time the kids are finished, they write much better than they did. I mean, they should write better than they did at the beginning of the year, but I think much better than they did at the beginning of the year.
My students have also changed. They look forward to coming to class. They know that we're going to spend some time talking about something that's happening right now. It's not just what happened in our book that's from 1997 or 2003 or whatever version we've got. They know that they can connect to me through even bringing up an article to me, which a lot of students do, and hand an article to me and go, I found this interesting. How do you feel about it? They're actually opening themselves up to me, and they're telling me more about it. I'll have students come up to me and say, hey, did you see that thing that was in the paper 2 weeks ago that are my ex-students? So I have a connection to my students that they would have never connected with me before. I receive emails from students that have graduated that say, hey, I saw this, I thought of you. That means a lot to me, because if they're thinking about me, that means they're thinking about their science class, and they're thinking about what they learned in my class, because it relates to something that we talked about way back when, 5-6 years ago.